Welcome, all you adventurous readers, to the epic worlds of Alfred Döblin, where we explore the life and works of this fascinating but little-known early 20th century writer. Brought to you by the website beyondalexanderplatz.com.
Welcome to Season 2 of our podcast, and this is the first episode. I'm Chris Godwin, and I'm here with Katie Kavanagh.
Hello, everybody. It's so lovely to be back. Oh, my goodness. How exciting.
Yeah, it's been a year since we
year. I can't believe
issued
it.
our episode 10 of the first series.
Yep, so that was, did we say that was on the 15th of April? So yes.
Yeah, so it's just about a year's gap. Yeah, we haven't been totally idle since then. I've translated 2 rather large bits of work, so they've been posted up on the website. So
Chris, remind us the name of the website.
The website beyond-alexanderplatz.com.
Brilliant. And it's a treasure trove of PDFs and extra information.
I don't think there's anywhere else in the English-speaking world that has brought together so much information about, not just about Döblin, but about several of his forgotten contemporaries, because there was such a breach in German literature in 1933 that a lot of stuff just sort of vanished out of the public view. And there's a load of interesting writers who are slowly being brought back to life and sometimes being published in English. But my website is, as you said, a treasure trove of a lot of stuff that still waits to be discovered by a wider public.
Excellent. Now, I know we are here primarily to talk about Döblin, but just very quickly, because we're on the subject, do you want to tell us any of the names of his contemporaries that you've translated that are on your website? If people are like,
yes. I mean, in fact, one of them I'm translating a bit more of at the moment. This is Robert Müller, who, in the same year that The Three Leaps of Wanglun was published the only other long-form sort of quasi-expressionist novel of in German prose, which was called Tropics, The Myth of Travel. And this is the most extraordinary book. I mean, it starts off like a boy's own adventure with these three bold European explorers going into the jungle to look for lost conquistador gold.
Okay.
And then it turns into a kind of amazing sort of quasi-philosophical or anthropological kind of excursus into all kinds of things about evolution, imperialism, Viennese manners. The middle of the book, they're stuck in this Indian village where the Indians treat them with a fair bit of disdain, and the Indians have their own very kind of solid culture, and they, these barbarians coming in from outside. And then it ends up as an unsolved murder mystery, very, very, very dark. But it's a magnificent work of language and of ideas. But the author committed suicide in 1924, very early on, and his works were never sort of republished for about 60, 70 years. And they started reappearing in the 1980s in Germany. And I came across it. I was fascinated. So, I translated it and trying to interest some publishers. Nobody knows who this man, so we're not going to bother.
Oh, well, we should. That's just one of his contemporaries. Then
that's just one, yes.
And there are many others that.
Well,
that are on
half a dozen.
Half a dozen. Okay, Let's get back to why we're here. Then Alfred Döblin. And we should probably have a recap, like a very quick kind of our highlights of season 1. Do you think?
Well, yes, I was going to ask you. I mean, what has stuck in your memory in this after this year's gap?
So the very first episode, I know it's a bit cliche to say, but the very first episode was when I heard your, it was for the reading at the end. And obviously Chris is a grandpa to my children as well. And so it's really lovely to hear your, just the expressive nature of your characterization within that piece. I can't even remember what it was now, but just to hear your voice, I thought, wow, that's so lovely.
Well, I would say I had a lot of practice while my sons were growing up. So, I mean, your husband had years and years of bedtime stories.
It was really
Which,
lovely,
yeah.
really nice. And then another favourite was definitely Manas. I think when was it Manas? I
Yeah,
think
it
it was
was
Manas
Manas. Oh, yes. Well,
with
I mean, in fact,
the double
William,
murder suicide,
he joined in, didn't
or the
he? He
murder
was,
suicide, not double
yes,
murder suicide.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah, that was quite
very
exciting,
dramatic.
very dramatic. And I would say it's been really interesting learning about Döblin. I certainly know a lot more about him now, obviously, having done this.
Right. Well, you remember we identified kind of three big strands, didn't we? So can you remember what the three big strands were of what we would be examining in this series?
Please refresh my memory.
Okay. Well, we're talking about Döblin the family man, Döblin the activist,
Oh yes,
and Döblin the writer.
yes,
And I think these are three very good lenses for bringing together interesting material. Because people who look at stuff on the website, they're mainly interested in having something to read, right?
yes,
And that's good. But
yeah,
I think it's always quite useful to know something about the background of a writer who you find intriguing and interesting and
very
fascinating.
true. Yeah, very
And
true.
it enriches the reading so much if you know something of the writer himself.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we were talking about his schooling, so his early childhood, that was really interesting. That struck a chord with
Yeah.
me, obviously, as a teacher. I found that very interesting. But yeah. So tell us what today's episode's about.
Right. Well, today we're really zooming in. We're taking the close focus lens now, and we'll be covering 3 days in 1933. Right.
Okay.
We're not going to be moving at quite the same pace throughout season 2, but these 3 days. This is really between the Reichstag fire and Döblin crossing a park on Lake Constance on the Bodensee from Germany into Switzerland
Chris,
and starting his 12 years of exile.
what is the Reichstag fire?
Right. Well, this was a pivotal event in February of 1933. I mean, in elections in January of that year, the Nazis had become the largest party in the Reichstag, but didn't have a majority. And lo and behold, some nasty communists come along and burn down the Reichstag, which is the federal parliament building, and gives the Nazis a perfect excuse to arrest and ban all the communists they can find. And then when the next election is held, which was just the next week in March, they, of course, achieved an absolute majority. And they bring in emergency decrees and suspend the rule of law, suspend civil rights, and so on, and change a country of laws into a dictatorship. It's shockingly fast this all happened. But yeah, the news of the Reichstag fire was being brought in. People woke up on the morning of the 28th of February, and the radio was blaring about this dastardly act, and the communist perpetrators had been caught at the scene, and the government was going to do this and that, blah, blah, blah. And Döblin's phone didn't stop ringing. And he went, why are we getting all these phone calls? But they're all saying, you've got to be careful. You've got to leave. You've got to go into hiding. Yeah, but why? But why? He's a doctor. He's a German citizen. He's performed his duties all his life and so on. He served in the First World War. Why on earth would he feel in any danger? But his publisher phoned up and said, look, you've got to leave. The French ambassador to Berlin, who was a great admirer of Berlin Alexanderplatz, and had gone out of his way to make Döblin's acquaintance, he phoned up and said, look, you've got to leave. And so Döblin was discussing with Erna, what should we do? And she said, well, yes, you'd better go off for a while, probably only for a few weeks or a couple of months, and then these awful people will have been seen off. They'll have.
So when did Döblin realise that he was actually in danger?
Well, it's when he was receiving all these phone calls from very influential people, very close to him, telling him the same story, and visitors were coming to the apartment and telling him the same thing, and so he realised that. perhaps he'd better be cautious, and it needn't be for very long, because how can such chaos be tolerated by
How can it
the
rain?
law-abiding Germans and
Yeah.
so on? Yeah. So, it said, well, okay, I'll disappear for just a short, go down to Switzerland for a short visit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, shall
So
we?
do you have an excerpt in his own words for that
Um,
morning?
well, yeah, he says, he heard at 9 o'clock in the morning, he heard it on the radio about the fire. And this was a communist attentat, a coup d'etat, an outrageous act directed against the German people, so on, so on. I turned the radio off. Words failed me. I'd had lots of dealings with radio and its current overlords, but this was the limit. Oh, he'd already been censored by the radio network. He'd been very active in the late 20s doing radio programs,
Yes.
but in the last year or two, he'd basically been sort of brushed aside by the current managements. Yeah.
Right.
So they really dare to push such a blatant swindle, blaming it on the communists. One has to ask, cui bono, right? Who benefits? Well, the answer was obvious. He said he really didn't feel worried for himself, but he was disgusted. But I say then he had all these phone calls and these visits. He could, he couldn't get his head around the idea that a big and powerful nation should change overnight from a country of laws to a state of a dictator and freebooters.
Yeah.
But by the evening, he'd been convinced that this really was serious.
And what about Erna? How was Erna taking it?
Well, she agreed that it would be a good idea for him to leave for a while, but she was still not fully sort of convinced that this was going to be some permanent and drastic change.
Yeah.
So just for that day, she was still saying, "Well, yeah, be cautious. Go off for a few weeks."
And so was it just Alfred that left? Did Erna stay behind?
No, that evening he was just Alfred who left. He packed a little suitcase and set off for the train station. But remember, they're living in this swanky apartment in the west of Berlin now because of all the money he'd made with Berlin Alexanderplatz.
Yeah.
He says, downstairs a surprise awaited. A Nazi with a civilian overcoat over his uniform was standing just by my doctor's nameplate. He fixed me with a glare and followed me to the underground. He waited to see what train I would board. He followed me into the compartment. At the Triangle, that's the big intersection station, I got off, he followed behind me. Then there was a crowd, an arriving train was emptying. I ran down some stairs and reached my destination later from another platform heading in some other direction. The train for Stuttgart would leave around 10 o'clock. I found a sleeping car place, and I carried the ticket around in my briefcase all through the 12 years of emigration.
Gosh, that's really quite frightening, isn't it, to know that you're being followed?
Oh, it's cloak and dagger stuff,
Very
and
much so.
you can surmise what might have happened if if this chap had sort of grabbed him by the arm and said, "Come with me."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh goodness, horrible. So how old was Döblin at that time? Remind me.
Well, he was in his mid-50s that year. Yeah, so he's not a young man.
Still, but still very capable. I mean, think mid-50s now. Kind of very active.
Yeah.
So as an enthusiastic Berliner, that must have been very difficult for him to leave, would it? Or was it, I guess at the time, you're probably not really thinking about all of that stuff. You're just like, I just need to get out.
He wasn't thinking about 12 years, no.
Yeah.
So,
just got to go.
Remember, because every time, when he did leave Berlin, every time he came back at night, he really loved seeing the kind of the arc of light over the city as the train approached.
Yes.
And so he looked out again at these lights and said, "Okay, well, I'm off on a journey now. We don't know really what's going to happen, but I'd better just go to sleep."
So he was headed for Stuttgart.
Yeah.
What happened once he got there?
Well, he needed to travel down towards the Swiss border, and then a bit further on to a little town which has a ferry that goes around the lake called Überlingen. So he spends the night in a hotel in Überlingen, and manages to get in contact with a Swiss psychiatric colleague that he and Erna had stayed with the previous year. who asking for sanctuary basically.
Right.
And then he got onto the ferry, crossed over to Constance, a German town on the other side of the lake, and there's a Swiss town of Kreuzlingen, which is actually, the two towns are really one town, but they're divided by a national border. And he just strolls across a park, and he's in Switzerland. He knocks on the door.
And does that? It begins there, does it?
That's it. That's the first minute of the first hour of the first day of 12 Years of Exile.
12 Years of Exile.
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh. Okay. So how long did he stay on this first stop then?
Well, just a few days really, because I mean, just a day or two after he got there, Erna turns up with 3 of the boys. She'd gradually realised that things were quite serious, and she was a bit frightened. And so there they are. So he was called out from this clinic where he'd been staying for this day or two, and there she was, very tearful. And the 3 of the sons, all of the sons except for Wolfgang, who had said he wanted to stay behind for a few weeks to complete his Abitur, his matriculation certificate.
What's that?
Well, higher school leaving certificate, and gives you the entry to university.
Okie dokie.
Right. I'll say we'll be doing an episode on Wolfgang, I think, later on in this series, because he was a mathematical genius, but unfortunately died during the German invasion of 1940. So there's a tragic story there, but a very interesting story. So I think we'll be able to enjoy that. But the interesting thing is that the other 2 boys, not the youngest, Stefan was still in primary school, but the other 2, Klaus and Peter, Alfred sent them back to Berlin because they needed to complete the education courses that they were on. Because it was, the end of the school year was just around Easter, just a few weeks ahead.
And how old were they?
Peter was 20, and Klaus, I think, Klaus would have been 16.
Okay.
So Peter was finishing an apprenticeship, and Klaus was finishing his junior school certificate.
Right.
So they went off to stay with friends in Berlin, where they'd be, they wouldn't be so easy to find.
Yeah.
But they probably weren't immediate targets of the police and so on. So so they went back to Berlin for a few weeks. But then Alfred had to think, right, well, now if I've got the family here, I can't burden this Swiss colleague of mine with a whole family. So we'd better head off to Zurich and think about long-term plans when we get to Zurich, and find a kind of place where the family can live.
Yes. Oh, okay. And how did this situation affect him?
Well, he freely admits that he was elated. Okay. He was so happy that this awful, oppressive burden of a paralyzed political system, which he says, it wasn't just the politics who were paralyzed; it was people's minds, their intellects had been paralyzed, and it was such an oppressively awful situation for a creative, politically engaged person.
Yeah.
that he really felt a great sense of relief. And I mean, the interesting thing is that he had already started his next big epic novel, the previous November or so, and this novel was about exile.
Yes.
It's the listeners can find it in PDF on my website.
Ooh, yay!
Right, it's called The Babylonian Exile, or Pride Goes Before a Fall. Right.
Oh, I like the sound of that. And have you done a reading from that work?
No, that's coming up in a few minutes.
Oh, okay, that's exciting.
Yeah. So he quotes a few lines from a poem by Schiller called The Diver. It was talking about a diver who's dived off a rock into a turbulent sea where the undertow is sort of sucking him down. But then a big wave comes along and he gets washed to the surface. And Döblin says, yes, I've been washed to the surface again. Yeah. So
very good. He's manifesting that. Very good. Okay. And how did this situation affect his writing then? He said he was, an exciting time for him.
Yeah, well, he could, having started this new epic, he could spend most of 1933 sitting in the library in Zurich, just working away this picaresque novel about this fallen Babylonian god wandering through 1930s Europe. And there's lots of historical references to events that have happened over the previous 3,000 years while this god has been asleep up in his crumbling heaven.
I feel we have definitely mentioned this in a previous episode, haven't we? I think it rings a bell. I think maybe if we didn't talk about it, we've definitely touched on it, mentioned it in passing.
Okay, but I mean the first excerpt we included among the 70 excerpts from Döblin's epic works in our Adventurous Reader's Guide to the Epic Worlds of Alfred Döblin, which was published last year, is the opening scene from the Babylonian exile, where the god is waking up in his crumbling heaven.
Oh, yay. Excellent. Okay. And have you, well, you just said you've prepared a reading from it. Are we going to launch into that now?
Have we got any other?
I don't think so.
Okay, no, I think we could, we could probably step right into the reading now.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Excuse me while I just take a sip of tea.
That's a good idea. I haven't actually brought a cup of tea with me into this. But thank you so much.
Right. Well, this is from part 2 of Babylonian Exile, where Marduk, who is now called Conrad, because Döblin says, we're not going to bother with all those grandiose Babylonian names, so we just call him Conrad. And his sidekick George, who is quite a villain.
Yeah. Like calling him Dave. We're just going to call him Dave.
Yeah. So he has gone in search of Babylon because he thinks, they'll all be so glad to see me roll up there, Hello, I'm your god.
Yeah. Hi.
But all he sees is this great field of rubble.
Okay.
And so here we go. They set off for the hill of Khazar, where once great Nebuchadnezzar was enthroned. He went willingly, no one dragged him. He would take himself down to the depths of the abyss. There are cowards who accept whatever comes their way, fend it off, and think they're brave when eventually they come through alive. This was not Conrad's style. Already he saw within him a murky glow, and he knew this glow, this glimmer of his rage that ignited in times of utmost peril. The glimmer had to grow brighter. Woe unto you lot! I understand you dogs. You think I'm an invalid. You think to leap around me because you toppled me when I lay up there snoring. I am the sinister jaws of a lion. Hearken now to my breathing and my roar. Soon your walls shall echo. Take flight. You don't know me. You don't know how I leap over hurdles. Woe unto you. The hill is called Khazar. It is also called the Inverted, and is a futile warning to all who creep there and still have a big mouth, who are mighty and ride in on big horses and smoke fat imports, and those who live on the inheritance of parents or grandparents, and those puffed up with newspaper fame, and those too that have been shaped by a gracious nature. How soon do beauty and form vanish? Monstrous walls along this path, 7 meters thick they were. On their front of brick there were long rows of lions striding in relief, in dazzling colours. All this was once your mighty realm, O Conrad. The rubble field was endless, fissures everywhere. A cool breath came from below, sometimes a horrid, thick miasma. Walls dropped vertically to the depths. A volcano had erupted over this city. The earth had grown up over the city. The Ishtar gate was already behind them. Conrad, head drawn in, was hard-faced. His stride was firm, his eyes burned into every item that appeared before them. On the gate he had spotted the Shirush, the snake with legs, his ancient symbol, gleaming unchanged from the olden days. The beast with the coat of scales, elongated head, two-tongued, stepping high like a cat on raptor-bird feet, and lofting its menacing tail. Don't close the eyes. Take it all in. Oh, and this, watch your step, there are gaps. This is the most important thing I can show you, apart from the famous stepped ziggurat. This is their guide, the archaeologist from Bremen.
Okay.
Exile, the airy house, the actual abode of the Lord of Gods on earth. Here's where he had his cell and his famous statue of gold. That was carried off a few times. You have no concept, gentlemen, what the presence of this divine statue meant to Babylon. Now it has happened. Now the world can rest. Nothing, Conrad believed, can surprise me now. But as at Exile before his own temple, it all became too much for him. And for the third time, the Great One took a fall. When he opened his eyes, his head was in George's lap. The doctor had placed his pith helmet on him. Conrad flung it off, was already on his feet. The snake that walks. It's just the unsteady ground and the disgusting air as well. Let's go back down, the doctor whispered. Below them gaped the canyon of an excavated street. Come, whispered the doctor, I'll help you climb down. I'll tell you more at the bottom. It's like a cellar in there. And already he had jumped down a step, then another, turned back to watch Conrad. A slow walk following the ruined walls, they circled in serpentine coils. They were in deeper shadow, meters deep below the surface of the earth. No sound came from above. We are in the realm of the dead, gentlemen. Everything has ended, and everything is here again. And he took Conrad, who merely glowered and was silent, was as not dumbfounded, by the hand, led him into the dark cave, and whispered, Don't talk. Sit on this stone. This is the chapel of Marduk. There, yes. And now you are the Great One, chief of all the gods, Marduk. And he took off his helmet, sank to his knees before Conrad, who sat there silent. You'll understand it all better now. The man from Bremen launched into an ecstatic liturgy. Most revered of all the great gods art thou. May thy destiny be without compare, thy commandments all-powerful. From this moment thy dictates are unalterable. Raising up and striking down lie in thy hand. O thou who wouldst be our avenger, to thee we give kingship over the entire universe. And with a snow-white face, a sweating brow, the man climbed trembling to his feet, bowed once more, whispered, eyes shining, We're celebrating the new year. How joyful I am. I am the high priest. Excuse the lack of proper costume. I am the high priest, and this is the king. Here, great one, greatest one, here is the king, your servant. He wants to show himself to you. Permit me to admonish him, to warn him. He pointed at George. Conrad leaned back against the wall. The German went over to lanky George. Hand over, king, those things you wear. Lay down before him the tokens of your might, your sceptre, your ring, the sickle. Give to him your kingly crown. Marduk shall examine you. George moved not a finger.
Bravo, bravo, very good.
Yeah, it shows all of Döblin's talents in there. You know, the visual description, the mood depictions.
It absolutely paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yes, and the and the fun in mixing the expectations versus the reality.
Yes. Oh, very good, very good. I enjoyed that a lot, Chris. It's always good to hear the excerpts. We'll say that. I mean, we haven't. That's 30 minutes of the show so far. Is there anything else that we want to include?
Oh, my goodness. I think since we're making such good progress, why don't we head off into episode 2?
Oh, okay.
Is that a bit premature?
That might be. Well, yes. I mean, we can. We're, very good, very exciting. So, shall we wrap it up there then and say, really excited to be back? And,
yes, and encourage everyone to look at the website, beyond-alexanderplatz.com.
Perfect. And I think, am I right in thinking we have at least 6 episodes coming? But I'm sure as we go on, there may well be more.
May expand, yeah. I mean, at least 6 and possibly 8. Yes,
6, possibly more.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Right.
All right. Well, and again, we relish people's comments and opinions on this, and if we're making people think, then that's always a good thing. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Well, let's encourage people to sort of, just spread the word among their social media contacts and so on, and hopefully, the podcast can reach more ears.
Perfect.
Yeah. And are we going visual? Are we going visual this time, Katie?
We are, yeah. We are. Will be on YouTube as well. So all of this content that we've recorded today will be up there. I will probably put all of season 1 on there as well.
Yeah, good. Brilliant. You're a very brilliant producer, so thank you, Katie.
I'm not quite sure how we can cut this out because of the video, so we're going to have to be careful what we say. Yeah. This may well end up being at the end of the video.
Right. Anyway, so thank you for listening, everyone.
Okay, really lovely. I feel like we've probably got enough content to do some outtakes at some points, but for now, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris. And
thank you, Katie. And we'll be back shortly. Yes.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Epic Worlds of Alfred Döblin. Join us next time to explore more about this fascinating writer's life and works. Meanwhile, visit the website beyond-alexanderplatz.com for posts about Döblin and some of his unjustly neglected contemporaries, as well as downloads of translations. So until next time, happy reading!